Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. Feel free to drop in the chat, where you're watching from. It's always cool to see where everyone's situated during these shows. If you have any questions or comments during any of the topics I'm going to cover, feel free to leave a comment. Drop it in the live chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it as we kind of move through the show. Please, if you haven't already, like this live stream. It really, really helps with the algorithm and people finding the channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we're trying to grow this community. And I want you, it's like Uncle Sam, I want you to be a part of it. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes in the description, so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and same deal as before. If you haven't already, please like this live stream and please subscribe. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. So total domestic box office was about 72 million for the weekend, which was about a quarter drop. Again, I've been saying this over and over. We're in this weird in-between stage where we're not really going to see... I don't think we're going to see any other huge movies coming out this year. I think we peaked with Deadpool and Wolverine. The only thing that could match something like that would be like a Moana 2. But I'm very bearish on that movie's critical or financial success. Well, financial, I don't know, because the brand is so strong because of things like Disney Plus. But I'm just not super hopeful about that. I don't see that becoming this huge success story the way so many other films this year have kind of surprisingly become. And I think it's telling the state of the box office that the first new movie in the top 10 is all the way at number 5, right? So it barely squeaked into the top 5 here. Speaking of here, it's called Here. This is its first weekend, bringing in just about $5 million, which just barely brought it into the projections I had for it, around 5 to 8 million. For those of you who say my predictions are always wrong, I was just barely right. Here, if you don't know about this is a Robert Zemeckis film, of course, the director of many classic films like Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump. So he has a lot of, I guess, kind of cultural or he has a lot of capital, so to speak. He's clearly, he hasn't really made a really good or great film in years, but Hollywood just seems to like him, and people like greenlighting films of his and financing them and producing them. This is a kind of interesting concept. The film is this shot you see down at the bottom banner here. It's basically a film all from one angle, but it's cutting between different points in time, kind of linearly, and kind of is charting the course of this relationship between the Tom Hanks and Robin Wright character. So you see here in this picture down below, or I guess it's to my left, that they're de-aged. It's a deep fake. And so it kind of seems like an interesting idea. I saw the trailer and it looked fine, and the reviews haven't been particularly great. Yes, it met the projections, but again, projections aren't necessarily always a measure of success, because the projections might take into account that it's going to underperform, in a sense, right? Because if you look at the budget, this was made for, almost $50 million. And on its opening weekend, it only made 5. And this was not a limited release. This was in over 2,600 theaters. So I'd be very surprised if this film even matches its budget, let alone doubling it to become an actually profitable film. But it's something I could see doing well on streaming for middle-aged white people who just want something on it. It's it's a kind of a sweet thing, and I like Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. It's kind of like a de facto Forrest Gump reunion of sorts. And then 2 other films opening this weekend are 2 Bollywood films. And please forgive me, I just know they're Indian films, and I don't know if that's correct to say that it's just because it's an Indian film, it's Bollywood. But from my understanding, these are 2 Bollywood films. At number 8, we have I'm gonna mispronounce this. Boolaya 3. So it's the third film in the Boolaya franchise. Only brought in a little over $2 million. Just barely a wide release, around between 700 and 800 theaters. But it's already been playing. Presumably just in India, but at least outside the United States. So it's already brought in worldwide now, close to $20 million off of like an almost $18 million budget. So, and of course this is all in rupees. I had to do like the conversions, for your convenience here. So it's, it's made back that budget, but it still has a little bit of a way to go. The other Bollywood film here at number 9, Singham, bringing in just a little over 2 million, kind of similar, almost same amount of theaters, though it's made more worldwide at like that 22.4 million, but it cost way more. It's like a $43 million movie. So right now that's in the red. And seeing as how low they are in the top 10, I'd be surprised if they're still here next weekend. But I'm also, it's not like we're going to have a bunch of huge films open next weekend. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But, again, it's always interesting to see when international films, especially non-English international films, kind of break into the top 10. And usually it's a sign of kind of what else is going on in the American box office in terms of, or maybe better put, what's not happening in the American box office. Continuing into its second weekend, holding its first place spot is Venom 3, Venom: The Last Dance, bringing just a little over 26 million for the weekend. This did not get good reviews. The thing with the other two Venom movies was there was this kind of like so bad it's good appreciation for them, I think, in a lot of ways. But it seems like fans of the last two didn't really care for this one that much. It's not like this abhorrent, offensive departure for the franchise. It's just like meh. It's just even people who liked the other ones are just kind of whatever about it. It did have the best per theater average of the weekend at around $6,300 per theater. And notably, it didn't have a huge drop. 48.8%. So like a nearly 50% drop is not good at all. But it is not catastrophic the way what have we seen here with some films? Like something like Joker 2 had an 80% drop or something, right? So this is decent, and so far, so at this point, it's essentially a profitable quote unquote movie, right? So its worldwide total is over $300 million. It was only made for 120, so I would classify this as a minor success. I feel like I gotta like codify these terms because I'm always saying different things. But I feel like when it comes to something like as like a success, there's like, minor, moderate, and major success, right? And then you can keep going up from major, but major's usually where something stops. Right now this is a minor success. It's barely doubled its budget. And will it continue going forward? I don't know. As people like to make fun of me for on this show, I like to say, is it gonna have legs, right? Right now, it's only in its second weekend, so we can't really get a good sense of that. It'll really depend on how big of drops it has third weekend, fourth weekend, and so on and so forth. Also continuing in its second weekend is Conclave, the kind of religious political thriller about the election of a new pope, holding its fourth place spot in its second weekend, bringing in about 5.3 million, only a 19.7% drop. Which is really good, really, really good. And of course, it's easy to have not as big of a drop when you, didn't make that much money. Like, I think, what was it? Last weekend it made around $6.5 million. So, but this is still really good, right? It's been getting really good reviews. It actually added 43 theaters, which I'm sure helped. And I've actually, I saw it. I released my review for it last week on cinemancuso.substack.com. I thought it was great. I'm definitely like the perfect Venn diagram for this movie as someone who is both considers myself fairly, Catholic in terms of my upbringing as well as my current belief system. But at the same time, I consider myself very, very left leaning, right? So this film, and I'm willing to interrogate my faith and my belief. So I'm like the exact cross section of this movie's like what this movie has to offer. It'll be interesting to see. There's been like awards buzz about it, but I'm not sure if that will continue into actually into 2025 when election season, before you'd slip, award season really starts to solidify like what films are kind of in the front of the pack. This brings its worldwide total to about 15 million, but still off a $20 million budget. So as of right now, it's still in the red. But again, even if it were to stop playing in every theater today, and that was the final amount of money it made, films like this are not really only about the box office. They, of course, are about the awards and the prestige. Looking here, still in the top 5, we have The Wild Robot, actually jumping up a spot. So it was in 3rd place last week and actually went up to 2nd in its 6th weekend, bringing just about 7.5 million. And this actually had a 10% jump, which is great, even though it lost almost 200 theaters. This is a film that did not open very big, but the intention was always to have a slow and steady wins the race approach, to make back that budget. And so far the legs, have been very, if we're talking about human legs, the legs have been very sexy, right? So it's, domestically it's brought in like 121 million. And it opened around 36 million. So if you look at that domestic multiple column, this is basically a measure of how much of the domestic box office, like what's the ratio between the total versus the opening weekend amount. So ideally you want this domestic multiple number to be higher because that means that you're making more of your money over time and you're not just front loading it, right? This means that there's good word of mouth and people are coming back to it. And this brings its worldwide total to around 269 million off of a $78-ish million budget. So again, I would classify this as a moderate, decent success so far. It couldn't happen to a better film. It's a really, really great piece of animation. So conversely, Wild Robot, like we said, jumped a spot. So of course that means something had to swap with it. So Smile 2 dropped from 2nd to 3rd place. Now in its 3rd weekend, made just a little under $7 million. I'm going to be curious with all these like horror leaning films here. Seeing as this last weekend, even though it's past Halloween, it was kind of, the last little squeeze that cinemas could get out of, the Halloween spooky season. So I'm going to be very interested to see what the drops are for something like Smile 2 next weekend. But this wasn't an awful drop, despite losing its spot to Wild Robot. It was only like a 29% drop. This brings its domestic total to around 53 million. Its worldwide total to about 110 million off of just a $28 million budget. So this is, well above, but now that I'm looking at it, that doesn't seem right, does it? Yes, it does. Okay. I'm like, the math doesn't seem to be mathing there. But yeah, so it's a pretty good success. The films like this and horror films are always a good bet because they're, they can only be so expensive, right? Like they're not going to have these giant visual spectacles the way like an Avengers movie will. So at a certain point, unless you're talking about salaries, for like actors or like really popular directors, there's like a ceiling to how expensive a horror film can be, right? So the idea with a lot of horror films is make them as cheap as possible, and if they do moderately well in terms of the actual gross box office, that percent return is really, really strong. And we see that here bright as day with Terrifier 3 dropping from 6th to 7th place in its 4th frame. So about a month in, only brought in about $3 million here, but not a huge drop, only about 32%. But look at that percent return, right? So worldwide, it's made like $64 million. As far as I could tell from from my research, it was only made for like $2 million. So this is by far, I've been doing this show for almost a year now. I started in February of 2024. Of all the weekends I have analyzed in terms of the box office, this might be the best percent return that I've ever seen doing the show. Over 3,000% return. So for every dollar they spent, they had this huge multiple And again, it just goes to show how valuable cheap horror films, when marketed really well, how valuable they can be. Also, just want to say quickly one last time, it seems like it's probably going to be the last time we're going to talk about this. Beetlejuice dropping from 7th to 10th place in its 9th frame. So I think I said this last week, but it bears repeating. I believe this is now Warner Brothers' highest grossing domestic film of the year, even surpassing Dune Part 2. Though I think Dune Part 2 is beating it when you take in the worldwide box office. But it only brought in about a little over 2 million. But again, this is like a moderate success here. This is, something I did not expect to do very well. I just didn't feel the Beetlejuice brand was iconic enough or strong enough today and had enough fans and loyalty today to really make a massive impact. But I would be shocked if Warner Brothers is not trying to find a way to convince Michael Keaton and Tim Burton and whoever else they can to make Beetlejuice, like make the third one. Because it's so far now worldwide, it's made about $445 million off of just $100 million budget. So this is definitely, has turned out very successful for Warner Brothers, even though the film was good but not great. And then looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have, speaking of horror films, we have the horror thriller Heretic, starring Hugh Grant, as you see here. Basically, the premise is these two Mormon girls are going door to door, ask people about Jesus and whatever, and they go to his door and he invites them in, and then it turns into this weird, almost like Saw-esque, like you have to choose to test your faith and all this stuff. So the trailer seems interesting. It's gotten decent reviews. I think I'm going to see it next weekend, so I'm excited. Next week, sometime in the middle of the week. Only projected to make about 10 to 13 million. So again, it's not going to have this huge box office gross, but again, it'll be what is it compared to the budget and how long can it sustain itself. We also have, I forgot to add the numbers here. I apologize. The numbers should be 8 to 11 million. This is the best Christmas pageant ever. It's based off of like a children's book about a town with some really naughty kids in it, and the mom of this family here, played by Judy Greer, decides to have the really naughty kids be part of like the town's Christmas pageant. The trailers seem kind of heartwarming, but I'm not sure how good it's gonna be. It's kind of like Christian film adjacent. Like the film doesn't seem to be super propagandic in any way, but it is still has like its roots. Like the studio, I think, is like Affirm Films or whatever it is, or Angel Studios. So again, not super big, but maybe it will kind of have like some holding power as we move into the more Christmassy season, which some would argue has already started. And then we'll also have an anime film, Overlord, The Sacred Kingdom. This is something I know nothing about. I assume it is related to an anime. If someone in the comments knows better than I, please let me know. It's only projected to make about 3 to 6 million for the weekend. Again, films like this, I would have to look into this. I will for next weekend, but I would imagine this has already been playing in places like Japan. So whenever you open it in the United States, it's just to make any little extra cash that you can. Maybe keep like the brand alive or introduce the brand to new audiences. Okay, before going any further, just want to give a quick plug. I kind of mentioned it before, but Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I cover topics. I write formal written reviews for new movies coming out. The newest review I have up now is for, like I mentioned before, the religious political thriller Conclave. Like I said, it's really, really great. Your mileage may vary depending on your religious and artistic and political, perhaps, leanings. But I thought it was really great. And if you are a Catholic who is interested in interrogating your faith in meaningful ways without abandoning it, this film is really worth the watch. You can find the link to the Substack with all the film reviews in the description down below, or you can just go to your browser, type in cinemaqso.substack.com. Concord.com. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. And again, if you have any comments or questions during the show, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I have it pulled up here, and I'll try to keep an eye on it. So let's talk about story number 1. So Disney, the Walt Disney Company, is establishing a new business unit focusing on artificial intelligence and mixed reality. By mixed reality, we mean things like augmented reality. So not VR, but kind of blending, like think of like your Snapchat filters, right? It's like it's superimposing effects onto a real world. Think like Pokemon Go, right? This new business unit is going to be titled the Office of Technology Enablement. I love corporate like buzzwordy, like fake names for things. And this is going to be an office that's intersectional with, many divisions and subsidiaries at the company, including, the film and TV production work, as well as like theme parks, both customer facing and not customer facing. It's going to be led by Walt Disney Studios' current chief technology officer, Jamie Voris. He is going to be reporting to Disney Entertainment co-chair Alan Bergman. And now that he's leaving this position as Walt Disney Studios CTO, he's going to be succeeded by Eddie Drake, who I guess is also at Disney. So the Wrap notes that the idea here is that the team will start out small, but then kind of grow over time. Though never, growing more than maybe like the idea is to remain as small as like maybe less than 100 people. So this is not meant to become this overarching or it's not meant to take over any artificial intelligence or mixed reality projects, but the idea seems to be it's kind of an internal guiding for kind of an internal group that will help kind of give guidelines and guidance to different facets of the company that are working with such technologies. And I have a quote here from Alan Bergman, again, the co-chair of Disney Entertainment, saying, quote, "The Walt Disney Company has always been a pioneer in blending imagination and innovation. Our ability to remain at the forefront of technological advances will only be more critical as we move forward, making it all the more important to understand and embrace new technological shifts in ways that enable our people, creativity, and business," end quote. And he says, again, like I kind of mentioned, he's saying here that the purpose of the unit is to make sure that the use of such technologies is, quote, aligned, strategic, and responsible, end quote. And Bergman went on to continue saying, quote, "The pace and scope of the advances in AI and XR, or extended reality, augmented, mixed, extended, whatever. The pace and scope of the advances in AI and XR are profound and will continue to impact consumer experiences, creative endeavors, in our businesses for years to come, making it critical that Disney explore the exciting opportunities and navigate the potential risks. The creation of this group underscores our dedication to doing that and to being a positive force in shaping responsible use and best practices," end quote. But that was a lot of corporate jargon. So what is like the deal with all of this? So, this move by Disney reflects, I think, the eternal problem, or the conundrum that companies in all different industries, the conundrum that companies like this are faced when they're faced with new technological innovations, right? Very, very big and successful companies got big and successful under the current paradigm, under the current status quo. So when something arises that disrupts that paradigm or disrupts that status quo, companies then have a choice, right? Do you I guess the way to phrase it is, do you kind of try to hope that this doesn't change you, or do you embrace the future, right? But there's a risk that you might be just, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're the head of one of these legacy companies, let's say you're the head of a film company like Warner Brothers, and it's 1943, and this emergent technology of television is on the rise. You have two options, right? Again, you could just do nothing and hope it doesn't really become that big of a thing, or you could adjust your business and embrace it. But then when you embrace it, there's the risk that it does not pan out, and now you've disrupted your existing business. And that kind of happened with a lot of these media companies with streaming, where they saw the huge numbers Netflix was pulling in, saw its meteoric stock market rise, and thought, well, we could do that. We want a slice of that pie. So they went all in. They put everything on red, right? Every company felt they had to have their own streaming service. So by the end of 2019, early 2020, we had like a dozen different major streaming services, and by 2021, Netflix stumbled, and it became very clear that maybe conditioning audiences to not go to the theater, which is a very reliable and one-to-one revenue source, maybe that was a mistake, right? Not that streaming itself was a mistake, but the way they went about it, right? And AI, and to a lesser extent mixed reality, but AI really, and that's really what is like the big headline from this. So like whenever you see any of these articles about this story here, all the headlines are about like they're starting an AI unit or division, right? Because it's AI is the not only the current big technological disruption, but it might be one of the most consequential technological disruptions since the internet itself. And that's the gamble, because it's easy to say in hindsight, oh, well, that company was dumb for not embracing this or that technology, because certain things now we know were inevitable, and it was useless to resist. But hindsight, of course, is 2020. So as the head of these companies, you have to figure out, okay, are these technologies transient? Is it kind of like blockchain, which had a lot of hype, but fizzled out? Or is it going to be something like the internet that, because there's plenty of articles from like the 90s being like the internet's a fad, and by maybe 10 years, from the mid 90s, they were saying, like, some people were saying like in a decade, the internet is not going to exist anymore. And of course, we all know how that went, right? But again, certain technologies are inevitable. So certain things are not inevitable. Certain adoptions of certain technologies are random and the result of just capitalism and one product, emerging victorious over another. So take like the physical media wars or kind of conflict, if you will. Maybe those are too strong of words, but between what was going to be the successor to the DVD. And it was between Blu-rays and HD DVDs. And they were these two competing media formats, right? Blu-rays ended up winning that battle. But that was not because it was an inevitable technology, Blu-ray specifically. What was an inevitable technology was home media or some kind of HD successor, right? That's the difference. So, it's artificial, like I was saying, artificial intelligence, unlike blockchain. Whereas blockchain technology like crypto and NFTs really struggled to justify itself. It was a technology, it was a solution in search of a problem, right? It didn't really seem, very applicable, and it was hard to understand what the extrapolations could be downstream. Whereas artificial intelligence is just as complicated, if not more complicated, yet its use case is very understandable, right? To both business people and average, consumers. And it's already proving useful, right? And it's going to continue to improve. Like I remember when being first using ChatGPT, I think it was like the fall of 2022, maybe early 2023. And I thought it was like this is like insane how useful this is. It's even better now, right? Like a year and a half, almost 2 years later. So, but media companies are not sure how to proceed, right? They don't know. I think they're all in agreement that this is not going away. That AI is not going to dissipate the way blockchain did, right? So, but what they have to decide is, how do they go about it? Is it about holding back the tide of AI as long as possible? Or, are you going to do what Disney's doing now, embracing the change? And that the value of that is that you get to be at the forefront of the technology, or at least its use in your industry. And again, you helped set the terms because you have that seat. You have that seat at the table. You get to set the terms of how this technology is implemented in media companies like this. So how is Disney going to use these technologies like AI and mixed reality? So again, mixed reality is not as big of a deal because, again, the applications seem less obvious and also less controversial. But I can imagine, being able to create interactive experiences, both at home, right? Like using your phone or something like, Apple Vision, whatever, like their VR headsets, as well as maybe like theme park applications where it's almost like a Pokemon Go thing, but for Disney of some kind, where you're using your phone's camera and kind of interacting with the parks in a new and novel way, right? But again, like I said, the big draw here of this story is the AI, right? So things that were specifically mentioned were, when it comes to film, like visual effects and post-production, right? That it could help streamline those processes, make them a little more manageable, which obviously is a big issue right now because so many of big budget blockbuster movies, the VFX suck, and it's not the fault of the VFX artists. It's just that there's so much work and not enough people, or rather they're not willing to pay enough people, and there's so much just crunch. They're just being forced to work like 15-hour days, 6-7 days a week. And of course, this always raises the inevitable question, will this replace jobs? Will people be losing their jobs because of something like this? And this was, of course, in Deadline notes, but they're not the only one to have noticed it. I mean, I thought the same thing. Of course, this is interesting because this was such a major concern of both the writers and actor strikes from last year. This idea of building in protections against being replaced by artificial intelligence systems. But it's it doesn't necessarily mean that jobs need to disappear. There's a scenario where this kind of technology, rather than replacing the work of human beings and just producing the same thing that they were producing, perhaps this could lighten the load, right? It can make existing jobs easier, or it could give them the time to focus on more fulfilling and important aspects of their job, and can kind of handle some of the menial stuff. Other ways I could imagine Disney utilizing this is like perhaps they could employ more chatbots for customer service. I mean, I'm sure they already are. I feel like every company is trying to use that now, like building their own chatbot so they don't have to pay, agents. That is something that people will get their jobs replaced by AI, right? But I could see something really interesting or creative where, perhaps Disney could launch almost like a chatbot to talk to different Disney characters, right? So it's like you can like message Mickey Mouse. And I'll tell you a little story. I remember when me and my family went to Disney World. I was 6 years old. This was 2003. My parents, I guess, asked the front desk to like have a wake-up call, and your wake-up call is a pre-recorded wake-up call from like a Disney character. And it was so Mickey Mouse called our room to tell us it was 7 o'clock or whatever it was, right? And I was so enchanted. I thought it was Mickey Mouse. So I started like asking him questions and telling him things, even though it was just like a pre-recorded message. Like I had no idea. But maybe now that technology is ready. Maybe we could do something like that where maybe it's not even just a chatbot. Like maybe, we're able to have in real time, like audio visual conversations with Disney characters. Like even if they're like little floating heads, like animojis or something. That could be an interesting use of the technology that doesn't replace anyone's jobs because that's not a job that currently exists, right? So this move to embrace this technology or new technology at all is fitting for Disney. Despite being very business conservative in a business sense, it is always since the Walt Disney days of when like the dude himself was walking around, the company's always been or tried to be at the forefront of new technologies, or just new adoption, or just being willing to embrace changes in the industry. So famously, Disney, was an early adopter of like home media and VHS tapes. Mostly because they were able to find a way to make it very lucrative where it's like, there's only going to be so many copies. Then it goes back in the Disney vault or whatever it is, right? they, I remember in the early 2000s, they were an early partner with iTunes to have video content, right? Because if you remember, you had the big fat iPods and you could watch movies and TV shows and videos on them. One of the first partners that Apple had for that was Disney, and having Disney content available for purchase on iTunes. But this isn't even that dramatic, because artificial intelligence and things like this have already been in use at Disney for some time already. I got a quote here from the CEO, Bob Iger. This was during a recent earnings call where he said, quote, "It's pretty clear that AI represents some pretty interesting opportunities for us and some substantial benefits. In fact, we are already starting to use AI to create some efficiencies and ultimately to better serve customers. Getting close to the consumer is a real goal of ours. But it's also clear that AI is going to be highly disruptive and could be difficult to manage, particularly from an IP management perspective," end quote. So, I think he's recognizing the concerns with AI, but that term of like getting close to the customer, or the consumer rather, is a real goal of ours. Now, are they going to be getting close to the consumers by, again, adopting these technologies to do new and interesting things? Or does it just mean using AI to analyze all of your rides and purchases when you're at the parks, and then decide and use an AI model to like analyze it and figure out how else they can monetize you? I don't know. I mean, I'm always cautiously optimistic, but it's probably just, probably more the latter. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2. Let me wipe the water on my mustache. Okay. So Sony, of course, the Sony of PlayStation relation, has officially closed Firewalk Studios after the disastrous release of the studio's multiplayer game Concord. The studio business group of Sony, the CEO of the studio business group, his name is Herman Holst, said here, quote, in a statement, said in a statement, quote, "Certain aspects of Concord were exceptional, but others did not land with enough players, and as a result, we took the game offline. We have spent considerable time these past few months exploring all our options. After much thought, we have determined the best path forward is to permanently sunset the game and close the studio. I want to thank all of Firewalk for their craftsmanship, creative spirit, and dedication," end quote. Also got a quote here. It's really more just a statement by Firewalk Studios on their LinkedIn page saying, quote, "We took some risks along the way, marrying aspects of card battlers and fighting games with first-person shooters, and although some of these and other aspects of the IP didn't land as we had hoped, the idea of putting new things into the world is critical to pushing the medium forward," end quote. So that's definitely like a very flowery post-mortem on this. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about here, so here's a little bit of background on Firewalk Studios and the game, Concord. So this is a studio founded in 2018. I think they were based in Bellevue, Washington State. They were founded with the gaming company Probably Monsters is like the name of the game, Probably Monsters. That was like their parent company. And during this time, they started working on some kind of multiplayer game, a la Overwatch or Fortnite or things like that. The studio was then acquired by Sony Interactive Entertainment, which is like where the PlayStation brand is housed. They were acquired by Sony in April of 2023 to support this project, because Sony has really been, in the past couple of years, really trying to build its roster of multiplayer games. If you don't know, these are live service games is like the genre, or games as a service. The idea that a game that is exclusively multiplayer, there's no single player campaign at all, there's no there's none of that, and it primarily makes its money on monetizing its existing user base over time. So if you think about it, something like Fortnite or Call of Duty or Overwatch or Apex Legends or any of these kind of games, they're usually free or cheap, but you pay for new outfits, you pay for new weapons, you pay for new maps and characters, and it's this constant, it's like every month or every couple of months, like the idea is to have a continuous stream of income. So Sony, bought Bungie, the original creators of Halo, who then left Microsoft to make Destiny, which was their like live service game. Sony recently, in like the past couple years, bought Bungie, so Destiny is now like a Sony-owned property. And it seemed like they were trying to build out that roster as well with Firewalk Studios. And the game just ballooned in budget. I think it was originally supposed to be about $200 million budget. It ended up costing about $400 million, which even for game development, that's a lot. But it wasn't unfounded in Sony's eyes. Sony expected this to be like a major tentpole game. That was going to be like an Overwatch or a Fortnite that became a mainstay in the industry that went on for years and years and years. The game came out in August of 2024, so a couple months ago, and it received mixed reviews and very, very poor sales. And it was so bad, in fact, or at least the reaction to it was so bad, that they shut down the multiplayer servers only 2 weeks after the game was released. And the director of the game and like the head of Firewalk Studios, Ryan Ellis, stepped down after the game was taken offline. So this is a big clusterfuck, and now a bunch of people have lost their jobs and livelihoods. So why did the game fail, right? How did we get here to the point where this little kind of indie-ish studio gets acquired by Sony, the Sony, and then about 18 months later it's getting completely shut down? Like, how does this happen? So, a lot of people have been doing post-mortems about this game. And there's a couple of factors that led to the game's middling success, shall we say. The biggest perhaps being it's just a very crowded marketplace, right? There's no shortage of games like this. Holst, who again is the CEO of that division of Sony, said, quote, in his statement, quote, the PvP, which means player versus player, the PvP first-person shooter genre is a competitive space that's continuously evolving, and unfortunately, we did not hit our targets with this title, end quote. And similarly, a research analyst from Media Research, his name's Reese Elliott, kind of put it best here, saying, quote, pivoting to live services is high risk, high reward venture. And the risk is heightened to levels that might not be worth it for many AAA console or PC publishers that aren't already active in the space, end quote. So it's kind of like, example, think about like the gold rush. Like if you got here, if you went to California after a certain point, you were fucked, right? Like you were kind of coming, like by the time certain people found out about it, the gold rush was over. Right? Like there wasn't any more gold, or it's like a stock, right? Like if a stock has a huge increase, or it has a huge jump at some point, by the time, like think of like Nvidia, right? The stock, the technology company. Once that company popped, if you tried to buy in, you most likely were going to have a loss because it was going to come down from the height that it reached, right? So it was foolish to think that they could just jump into this space that had kind of already run its course by the time they even started working on it. And that brings me to my next point, is that the genre itself is there. People are losing enthusiasm for it, not necessarily for multiplayer games, right? Because people have always enjoyed multiplayer games for decades, and people will still do that, right? But this specific kind, right? The first person or third person action shooter games as a service, with season pass and continuous updates, it's wearing out its welcome, right? New games like Concord are failing to launch in the first place, and even established games are struggling. Like Fortnite, I would imagine is not maybe I wouldn't say isn't as successful, but rather it's not growing at the same rate. Like it's kind of hitting a ceiling in terms of how successful it can be. And on top of that, the game felt dated, right? So it's, within this genre, there's the hero shooter, and I guess that kind of is defined by a bunch of different, very distinct kind of characters with different kinds of weapons and abilities, and people kind of get attached to them almost like their characters, right? Like they're characters in like a movie or something, or a TV show. And Matt Kim, who's a writer at IGN, notes that the peak of the hero shooter was from like 2007 to 2016. And that would be like from the release of Valve's Team Fortress 2 up to 2016's Overwatch, right? So again, by the time they started developing this in 2018, it was already kind of they were already kind of late to the party. So releasing a fairly conventional hero shooter game as service in mid 2024 seems like it's not just in hindsight that wasn't going to work. That I feel like that was obvious. It didn't help that the game cost $40. So for context, a lot of modern games cost $70. But again, the idea of a live service game is that it's like when you get like an iPhone game where it's free, but then there's all the pop-ups, or they want like, if you want more lives, you have to spend $2, right? Many of these games like this are cheap or free. And again, they monetize players through microtransactions. But then ultimately, I think all of those factors are really important, but perhaps the most important factor, even more than the fact that it's a crowded marketplace, is that wasn't particularly good. It seems like it wasn't this awful game, but it just was kind of forgettable and mediocre. And again, Matt Kim from IGM wrote an article, kind of like a post-mortem, titled, quote, "Why Concord Failed," end quote. And he, in his article, basically sums this little chunk here sums it up best, saying, quote, "The cost of coming late to the party means you must bring something new to the table. Unfortunately, Concord is neither particularly innovative nor content heavy," end quote. So it really didn't really add anything to the conversation. It didn't really have anything to compel people who really do like the genre to jump ship and spend a lot of their time investing in this game, right? So the question now is, is this the canary in the coal mine? Will game studios move away from this genre, from live service games? I don't think so. I think this failure hurts the genre, but won't kill it. What's gonna kill it is gonna be a slow death. It's gonna be these previously mammothly successful titles slowly having negative growth, just less and less people slowly over time really investing in it. But I would be shocked if anyone really tries to come in with a new game like this. I think at this point, the only ones that are going to survive are the ones that are already well established. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. I love this picture. I think it's hilarious. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. So Donald Trump, is suing CBS for, quote-unquote, deceptive doctoring of Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview. The lawsuit says, quote, "CBS's partisan and unlawful acts of election and voter interference through malicious, deceptive, and substantial news distortion calculated to confuse, deceive, and mislead the public," end quote. This was filed in the notably conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Texas, which is strange because neither the plaintiff nor the defendant neither party is based there, but it is packed with a bunch of Trump appointees. So that probably is the reason why. They're seeking $10 billion with a B and a jury trial. Funnily enough, because, Trump is not always able to get, like, the most diligent people working on his legal team, the lawsuit actually gets the date of the broadcasts wrong by, like, a day. So it's not ridiculously wrong, but they're still wrong. And the lawsuit continues saying, quote, "To paper over Kamala's word salad weakness, CBS used its national platform on 60 Minutes to cross the line from the exercise of judgment in reporting to deceitful, deceptive manipulation of news," end quote. So what's the background? You might have no idea what I'm talking about here. So the background of all this is, in early October, I think it was on October 7th, Kamala Harris sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes, the very acclaimed, storied program from CBS. Notably, Trump agreed to do one because they interview both candidates, and he had agreed to do one, but then backed out because they said they were going to fact check him, and he didn't want that for obvious reasons. And the controversy here is, in the interview, she was asked about something regarding Israel, I believe. And so they show the interview asking the question, and they show her answer. But then on CBS's Face the Nation, which is like a separate program, they had like a little promo of the program, and it showed a different answer from Kamala. So people immediately were like, critics felt that the 60 Minutes version, that was actually part of the 60 Minutes program, that version of the answer was edited to make her seem more succinct and less rambling. And the evidence for that is that the version used as a promo on Face the Nation gave a different kind of answer, a more bloated answer. And of course, Trump, you have the lawsuit, which has like very, legalistic formal language, but then also Trump posted about it. I think it was like on Truth Social. And I'm going to read this whole thing in full. And I wish you could see the post because there's so many hilarious, all caps sections. So you should go look this up. I'll just read it here saying, quote, "A giant fake news scam by CBS in 60 Minutes. Her real answer was crazy or dumb, so they actually replaced it with another answer in order to save her or at least make her look better. A fake news scam, which is totally illegal. Take away the CBS license. Election interference. She is a moron and the fake news media wants to hide that fact. An unprecedented scandal, 3 exclamation points. The Dems got them to do this and shouldn't be forced to concede the election, question mark. Wow, exclamation point, end quote. I also love how all of Trump's posts always feel like they're just a collection of clickbait headlines. Like, it's not like one post. He'll just say, take away the CBS license, and then a random other sentence will just be an unprecedented scandal. But in any case, before this lawsuit, people were complaining about this, mostly, and by people I mean mostly Trump and his supporters. And they demanded CBS release the transcript of the full interview so we could understand, what her actual responses were. CBS refused, as is their prerogative. In their statement explaining why, said, quote, "When we edit any interview, whether a politician, an athlete, or movie star, we strive to be clear, accurate, and on point. The portion of her answer on 60 Minutes was more succinct, which allows time for other subjects in a wide-ranging 21-minute long segment," end quote. So their kind of argument is, we can have a longer version of her answer as a promo, because the promo can just be however long it wants to be, and it could just be about this one thing. But if we want to make sure we show our audience all of the topics we covered, we can't have the breadth of the whole interview, I guess, is like the idea. So, personally, this whole situation is totally overblown, but not completely overblown. It's like 99% overblown, but there's like a 1% appropriate blownness, if you will. Because interviews like this are edited all the time, for the reasons I said, for clarity and for time. That being said, we should always remember, as I try to say on the show again and again, there's no such thing as objective news or objective coverage, because choosing what to cover and how to cover it is still a subjective choice, even if you're being objective within the confines. Like you're not giving any opinion. There's subjectivity in the decision of how to actually report the news at all. So there's still an element of bias when you're editing an interview like this, because you're deciding what clarity looks like. You're deciding what she means. And I'm not saying this is some evil, awful thing. This happens in any edited interview ever, but there is still that element that is undeniable. Though it's kind of silly, though, that they're trying to say, they're doing this to help Kamala and hide her verbal or conversational shortcomings. But how can you claim election interference or obstruction if CBS themselves are the ones who released this other part of her answer? And CBS News Senior Vice President Gail C. Sproul basically said as much in a letter to Trump's legal team, I think prior to the lawsuit, as the lawsuit was maybe brewing. And she said, quote, "It begs logic to argue that 60 Minutes hid the first part of the vice president's answer to the question. It did not. The public is aware of that part of her answer because 60 Minutes itself publicly distributed it by providing it to Face the Nation for promotional purposes and posting on X and other 60 Minutes branded social media for the same reason." So again, it's like you're accusing us of hiding something. We're the ones that put it out. So if we were trying to hide it, why would we have done that? And again, like they said, they would do this for any interview, right? Again, like they said, whether it's an athlete or a movie star or a potential presidential candidate, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, they're always going to do this just by the nature of like having a time constrained television program. That being said, Kamala definitely benefits from it, right? She is best in highly scripted settings, like she's giving a speech, or very casual, unscripted settings, that where there's no expectation to say the right thing. She can just like be herself. It's where she's in these unscripted formal settings, right? Like an interview where she has to speak as Vice President Harris, not Kamala, right? And it's in these settings where she descends into that word salad that everyone has known for years. That you could find like a Kamala Harris word salad and funny moments YouTube compilation very, very easily if you were to type that in. I think we can critique her for a lot of things. I don't really put that much weight into like her not being able to string together sentences. I'm more concerned with her policy positions, and I think the reason why she does this word salad is because she's way too calculated as a politician. She doesn't really have strong convictions one way or the other. So that's why, but she's not good at improving, right? She's not good at making it seem like these are her authentic convictions. So that's how you get into word salad, because she's trying to in real time figure out what to say and how to say it. So ultimately, CBS, they should have just released the transcript if they had nothing to hide. And maybe that's not a good answer, right? Because that's something people will say about, the government listening in, like with NSA in our phones. Like, well, if you have nothing to hide, like, what do you care? There is a certain level of, privacy, but at the same time, this is of national relevance. I feel like they should have been releasing the transcripts anyway. But ideally both, or releasing the full interview online after it premieres, or maybe a couple days later, just so we can see, just for posterity, just for historical, documentary sources, right? They shouldn't have to do this, right? It's kind of like with Obama and like the birth certificate. Like, he should not had to have proven he was an American citizen. But whether you should have to, regardless of that, not doing it gives your critics ammunition to attack you. They can then say, oh, well, they're not releasing it, so they must be hiding something, right? So, but at the end of the day, Trump is always filing lawsuits that ultimately go nowhere. It's a battle. He lawsuits for him, it's lawfare, right? He always talks about it being used on him, but really he's like the king of lawfare. The lawsuit itself is a battle tactic. It is a means to an end and not an end in of itself. And Deadline notes that, in the past he sued media companies like the New York Times and CNN. And as far as I'm aware, those never went anywhere, right? But what is concerning here is it's a suggestion of what a second Trump administration could look like. Because again, in that rant post he posted, he whether he means it or not is debatable, but he is explicitly calling for revoking the license, the FCC license, of one of like the legacy television networks. Like, this isn't even like CNN. Like, you can't even make the argument it's like this cable, very partisan. Like, it's CBS. Like, you don't get more down the middle than like the traditional networks like CBS, NBC, and ABC. People may assume they lean left, but that's just because they're just very down the middle, and facts often lean to the left, unfortunately. So, it's a continuation of this, it could show what a Trump administration could be like. And again, there won't be any guardrails this time. There's not going to be any way that there's not going to be the same people there to kind of curb his worst instincts the way that they maybe did in that first administration. A continuation of this idea of the press being the enemy of the people. Because at the end of the day, the fall to fascism is a death by 1,000 cuts. It's often, most of the time, we lose, we succumb, we fall into a loss of democracy usually very slowly. So it's like that erroneous analogy of like a frog in a pot of boiling water, that if you slowly turn up the temperature, it won't notice and it'll boil to death, which I believe actually is not true. But in any case, the analogy rings true here, right? A true, most fascists will never change. It's not going to be like they change everything on day one. It'll be a slow process, right? That is imperceptible to those not paying attention. So, it is a little concerning that, like, with a White House and government in place that is more willing to work with him, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will revoke CBS's license, but that could give networks like CBS pause before going toe to toe with the president. And I think that is dangerous. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 4. So, California Governor Gavin Newsom has proposed more than doubling the state's current film tax incentive program, raising it to $750 million annually. It's currently capped at $330 million, so this would be more than doubling it. And this would make California's program the second largest in the country, after only Georgia, who has an unlimited amount. There's no cap on how much film production companies can claim for the tax program, the tax incentive. Newsom put out a statement saying, quote, "California is the entertainment capital of the world, rooted in decades of creativity, innovation, and unparalleled talent. Expanding this program will help keep production here at home, generate thousands of good-paying jobs, and strengthen the vital link between our communities and the state's iconic film and TV industry." End quote. So this, I'm gonna rewind a little bit and let's take a little stroll down memory lane. So how, he says here that the California is the entertainment capital of the world. How did that happen? How did Hollywood end up in Hollywood? So film as a medium really became like an actual codified thing. There have been like experiments and examples throughout like the 19th century, but the medium really developed in earnest in the 1890s, both in the United States with like Thomas Edison in New York, New Jersey, as well as in France, right? So most American productions before like a certain year in like maybe the 1900s and 1910s, most American production was initially centralized in New York and New Jersey. But at a certain point, these companies and these productions moved to California for two main reasons. The weather, right? Because the weather is basically the same all year round and is typically good, right? You don't have to worry about massive rainstorms, especially now, right? Because they're in a drought, or I think they are, or they may have been. That's number one. But more importantly, they could avoid patent laws, right? Because Thomas Edison had a patent on the camera. So if you wanted to make a camera, you had to pay him a nickel or whatever, however much money it was. And of course, this is pre-internet, pre-mass communication. So it was a lot easier to, if you wanted to avoid and basically pirating content. So it's funny how Hollywood company or American media companies are so against piracy when in fact, Hollywood was initially built on the idea of piracy. Back then, if you went all the way across the country, hundreds of miles, it was very far from the patent office in New York. It was harder for someone in New York to know if people were infringing on their patent in California. It was kind of looser. So that was a main draw and drive to move out to California. And then ever since Hollywood Land, which later just became Hollywood, because the famous sign had land at the end, it eventually became this almost mythical place for Americans. It is this idea of this almost fantasy world where the people could become big movie stars and all your dreams come true, kid. And and ever since, the center of American film production has been primarily focused in New York City, but mostly in Los Angeles, in California. But that is slowly declining now. Film production in the city specifically, because this is for California, the state, but really this is mostly going to be happening in Los Angeles or its surrounding areas. But film production in the city has declined. The New York Times notes, this is for a couple reasons, right? So the New York Times notes other states in the past couple decades have been trying to be more aggressive with their tax incentive programs, trying to woo productions away from like those major centers like New York and LA. The long and short of it, it's very complicated. It's not always the same state to state, but essentially these tax programs, the idea is that if you come and you do the application, like you come, but you've already done like your application process, whatever, and you've been approved for this program. When you come to this state or city or whatever it is, and you spend money there, and you keep all your receipts, and you tell this state how much money you spent on what, you can get a certain amount of it back, and that can really help a lot of productions, because they're essentially getting a discount. They're able to get some of that money back, and that's really important in terms of when you're building out your budgets and trying to find financing and things like that. Currently 38 states, so almost like a 2/3 majority, I think. 38 out of the 50 states offer some kind of incentive program. Of course, they vary. So, like, for example, my home state of Rhode Island, I think it's something like, it's like, I forget what it is. I want to say it's either 7 million or 70 million. I think it might be in the tens of millions of dollars. So obviously it's way smaller than something like California, this proposal, which would be like 10 times that amount. And the New York Times also notes that $25 billion in tax incentives have been given out over the past 20 years or so. And this proposal would be useful because California's limit at $330 million is quickly reached. So productions, if they want to get some kind of tax rebate, they have to go looking elsewhere at different states. And that gives these other states the opportunity to make them an offer they can't refuse, as they say. So Colleen Bell, who's the executive director of the California Film Commission, said, quote, "We're losing our market share, and there's no reason. Production companies are just seeking these tax credits. It's not enough anymore just to be the state with the best crews and the best weather and the best locations," end quote. So that's one element, that other states are actively trying to compete with California in this respect. Another issue, though, and this is going to be across all 50 states, is that the industry is just contracting, right? The streaming market kind of bottomed because there was this kind of sense over the past 10 years or so of like endless growth, as much content as we can make, for all these streaming services. But once the streaming bubble kind of burst, a bunch of these companies took a step back and became way more austere. So that, coupled with the dual strikes from last year, there's just less productions being greenlit and produced, just on the whole, with film and TV productions. And again, those dual strikes really put a massive pause on everything. So will this proposal go through? Most likely, yes. So the New York Times notes it's likely to receive support from some key groups, namely organized labor, like the crews and the actors and things like that. There's a powerful state lobby that wants this to happen, as well as, the state house has a lot of, the governor has many fellow Democrats who are going to help kind of push this through. And, it makes sense because legislators actually passed a 5-year extension of the current program last year. So it's already pretty recent that they've expressed their support for this. And, the way that probably a lot of California politicians see it, it's too important not to approve. Because if you look at Los Angeles, without film production, what does LA have? New York has the benefit of being this very diverse, in terms of industries, a very diverse city. So it's not just film, but there's theater, and there's art, and there's museums, and there's finance. There's like so many different kinds of jobs and industries that have such a strong presence here in LA. And if anyone's watching from LA, please let me know in the comments. But is there anything comparable to film and TV production in LA? Like, if that declines or disappears, like, what else does LA really have to drive its economy and give it an identity besides just being a super expensive city to live in that hates homeless people? And so does New York. It's not just throw shade at LA, but LA is just as bad, if not worse. I'm asking here, will this go through? But maybe a better question would be, would this actually help? Would this be good to do in the first place? Potentially no, right? Because this is in response to other states offering better incentive programs. So this could just be a continuation of like this arms race, right? So if they raise their incentives, then other states will then raise theirs, and it'll just keep going forever until eventually they hit a ceiling of like, okay, we cannot keep giving out all this money. And it's frankly debatable, because again, the whole idea of these programs is that it adds economic activity. That the idea is that yes, we give some of this money back to these film productions, but the economic activity generated by these film productions being here, whether it's the purchasing of local goods or services, or even just, again, like paying out the local crew, and then that local crew then uses the money in the city, in their communities. That's the idea. Is that it stimulates more economic activity than the amount that we're giving back to the productions. But this is not necessarily 100% true or confirmed, right? So economists have long expressed skepticism that such programs actually help more than they cost. In a 2023 report from the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance found the return on their program, and of course this is one of the biggest programs in the country of this kind. The return on their program was between 15 to 30 cents for every dollar invested. And the report said, quote, "The film production credit is at best a break-even proposition and more likely a net cost," end quote. So I'm not saying they made 15 to 30 cents on top of the dollar. Like, they gave $1 and they only got like 30 cents back. The New York Times also notes that in some cases, each job that was quote unquote created cost taxpayers more than $100,000, right? So it's unclear if such programs actually help on the whole. Now, they might help certain groups and people, and that's like the classic story of American politics, is certain things being done to help certain interest groups and not working class people as a whole. My personal take on all this, I don't want people to lose their jobs, but I would argue that a lot of these jobs exist because LA and New York and these cities like this have had a monopoly on film and TV production for so long. And LA specifically has had it good for too long. And like Colleen Bell, who's like the commissioner of the California Film Commission, said, it's not enough anymore just to be LA. My background, coming from Rhode Island, I went to NYU for film school, but I ideally, I love Rhode Island, and I would have preferred to stay there and be close to my family, and also just be in a state that I love. But if I really wanted to, take a stab at being a filmmaker or entering the film industry, I had to move to New York, right? So how different my life could have been, if there was, it doesn't have to be an LA level, but if we spread out, it's almost like wealth distribution. If we spread out this production, imagine if there was like a healthy film industry in Rhode Island, in Providence. There's like a couple major productions like a year. Young filmmakers or people who want to be in this industry in some capacity, they have no choice but to move to LA or New York or Atlanta. And of course these huge, productions, this really only matters for bigger films, right? Because I think like a lot of these programs, like it needs to have like a minimum budget of like $1 million, if not more. So this is like really, I think it's just giving more money to the people who already have money. So I'm more interested in how can we spur more independent, low budget or mid-budget production across the country. And frankly, maybe these tax dollars should be used on more important things like social services. I don't know. And again, most people in the film industry are working class, but, I don't know if it's the best use of tax dollars to go to a program like this, let alone more than doubling it to nearly $1 billion every year. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Let's talk about story number 5. So the Grammy Awards, in a big shocking reveal, is leaving CBS, its home for over 50 years, and moving over to Disney. So Disney secured the rights in a 10-year deal that's going to start in 2027. They are now going to have, in 2027, the Oscars, the Grammys, and as well as the Super Bowl. I don't know if it's the Super Bowl for many years. I think it may just be that 1 year. But that first year is good. They're going to have really a lot of important live events. It's going to air on ABC as well as Hulu and Disney Plus. And I got a quote here from Dana Walden, who's the co-chairman of Disney Entertainment, saying, quote, "As the Walt Disney Company combines forces with the Recording Academy to open this exciting new chapter in the history of the Grammys, we do so with pride and gratitude. Live events have never been more important to our culture and industry, and we just acquired one of the crown jewels, adding to our portfolio of world-class programming across all genres," end quote. So again, like I said, this is a major change. Like I said, this has been on CBS since 1973. When this first started on CBS, Richard Nixon was president, right? It had aired on NBC from 1959 to 1970, and it was briefly on ABC, funnily enough, from 71 and then 72, and then starting on CBS in 73. Like I said, Disney already has the rights, and they've had the rights for quite some time, to the Oscars. So now they have two of the major entertainment award shows under their umbrella. So this story interests me because it's a reflection of two different corporations in two different situations. On one hand, you have Disney, who, like I said, is adding to their awards roster and live television roster and bringing this now under its umbrella. But then on the other hand, this is reflective of the larger change happening at Paramount Global. Of course, I've done many videos about this, but this year was like the year of the Paramount merger and acquisition with Skydance, right? It seemed to finally be happening. And Deadline notes that, the newly merged Paramount Skydance, whatever they're going to call it, new Paramount, its primary, one of the things it's going to want to do on day one is cut costs, right? And it seems to be more interested in spending this money on live sports and primetime franchises when it comes to their linear television spending. Interestingly, though, they did renew their rights for the Golden Globes earlier this year. I did a video about that on the channel. So I guess they've decided the Golden Globes are more valuable than the Grammys, which I think is absurd. Maybe the ratings say otherwise. I don't know. And this could also be, this decision with the Golden Globes was made before this merger, of course, happened, and now new management has different interests, right? So it raises this question: are award shows valuable properties anymore? Like, is this even worth a company vying for in the first place? Because ratings for these kinds of shows, even the highest rated ones, they're at their lowest. They just don't have the same pull anymore. Our media consumption is so fractured. People don't feel the need to watch the Oscars or the Grammys to learn about good content. They're finding it themselves, right? The purpose of these broadcasts have always been to make money, first and foremost. So, if they're not able to get more eyeballs, they can't sell the ad space for as much money. So it becomes this loop where, okay, they don't have as much money, so they don't put as much money into it, which kind of dampens the quality of the show and makes people not want to watch it. It becomes this cycle. Though of all the award shows, except maybe the Oscars, just because of the prestige it has, if it has any, I feel like the Grammys is actually really well positioned going forward. It's somewhat resistant to this waning enthusiasm, because people don't really care about the awards themselves. But the Grammys, unlike these other shows, except like maybe the Tonys, the Grammys is the perfect vehicle for essentially a variety show, right? You can naturally fit in a string of essentially mini televised concerts. Whereas obviously the Oscars has like musical performances, but that's not the main purpose. And usually the performances are just like songs from movies. Whereas like you can have like Chappell Roan at this last Grammys performing, and is this big theatrical, she's dressed like Joan of Arc, so she's Roan of Arc, right? Like, you can't do that necessarily at some of these other shows. So I feel like the Grammys is actually one of, if not the most valuable award show that you could possibly have. So why CBS let this go, I don't know. Again, my guess would just be that the new management is just not interested in it. Okay, so that wraps up the show. Just want to give a few quick plugs. This isn't my only YouTube channel. I also have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more structured, formal video essay format. The video I have up now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using this old and young version of myself, these cartoon versions of myself. It really would be a huge help to go check out that video. You could leave a comment letting me know how you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link in the description down below. Also want to give a plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where each season we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This season we're doing Star Wars, which has been a massive undertaking. We just released our episode on Rogue One last Friday, so you should go check that out. This upcoming Friday we're doing The Last Jedi, so very divisive film. We had a lot of interesting stuff to say. We just recorded it yesterday, actually. So highly recommend you go check that out. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us on the link down in the description below. And then finally, I want to plug Cinnamon QSO. Like I said before, it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as, and still is, a Substack newsletter where I write more formal written reviews for new films coming out. The most recent review I have is for the film Conclave that just came out recently. I've been doing this for almost 3 years now, which I can't even believe myself. I have over 100 reviews on different movies, so there's a nice backlog of stuff. So it really would mean a lot to me if you could go check that out. Subscribe so you can get it right to your email inbox. You can find the link to that in the description down below. You can also just go to your browser and type in cinnamonqso.substack.com. That's it for the show. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm. So maybe one day I can quit my full-time job and make money off of this and just live a very humble YouTuber life. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because again, it really does help. It does give me that little hit of dopamine. But until next time, peace out.